Good morning, everyone. I'm Thiru Vignarajah, a candidate for mayor. I'm joined by our acclaimed local economist, Anirban Basu, and a true visionary and hero of Baltimore, Rebecca Hoffberger, as well as a number of residents and leaders within Baltimore City who know how precious the public hallowed ground that we stand on is. July 1980 was a big month. On July 10th, 1980, my mom and dad crossed an ocean with a 3-year-old and an infant child and brought their family to this great city. It was a big week for us for 1,000 reasons that 3-year-old Thiru could not imagine. What I didn't know then was that it was also a big week for Baltimore. A few days earlier, before we arrived on these shores, during the weekend of July 4th, 1980, Mayor William Donald Schaefer opened Harborplace, an iconic signature attraction that would become the coveted asset and envy of the world. It is said that after Disney World, Inner Harbor was one of the most attractive locations for tourists around the country, around the world. And it wasn't just because it was picturesque and beautiful, though it was. It was because it did something that no place had ever done. It took water that was just big enough to be big and just small enough to still feel small, and it made it available to the public. It opened marketplaces that were meant for the public. It was where families were to bring their children. It was where residents were to bring their relatives. It was where my parents, my Amma and Appa, would bring every relative visiting from New York or across the world. This is where they would show the face of Baltimore, in many ways the face of this country. Mayor William Donald Schaefer would be turning over in his grave if he knew, if he thought, if he imagined that a future mayor might take this consecrated public ground and turn it over to developers to turn into luxury high-rises for the sake of a few $1,000s of campaign donations. He would say, I would imagine, shame on them. I am here to make a public pledge that what they are proposing will not happen when I am mayor. I will block the proposed construction of luxury high-rises at the Inner Harbor Park. We will not allow the most precious public space we have, certainly in Baltimore, perhaps on the Eastern Seaboard, to be turned into an exclusive resort for the wealthiest of the wealthy. By the way, if you want something like that, if you want a luxury condo with a view, 414 Light Street is right there. You can walk around the harbor to Harbor East. You can drive across Hanover Street Bridge to Port Covington. It is not as though we don't have enough fancy apartments for fancy people. What we don't have enough of is public spaces, is public parks, is places that we can bring our families to celebrate all that is best and beautiful about Baltimore. But the reason we picked this place is not just because you can see what they intend to destroy. It is also because there are some things that the public in Baltimore does not know, does not fully appreciate. It's been reported on a blog here, an article there, but when you ask the overwhelming majority of people in Baltimore, they don't realize that the developers who, in a backroom deal, appear to have gotten this property already had their tentacles, their hooks into other properties around the corner, over our shoulder. There's a parking lot across from the Renaissance Hotel that MCB Realty and Dave Bramble could build a luxury high-rise if they wanted. If their premise that Luxury high-rises are critical, are vital, are a prerequisite to activate this space. Build there. If their premise was right, you would have thought 414 Light Street would have changed the contours of this precious space. It is not, because very wealthy people living in very wealthy buildings is not what makes a place special. It's when people from all neighborhoods, from all walks of life, teachers and immigrants who have just come, natives and newcomers who have been here for decades, when they bring their families, when they bring their children, when they bring their friends from out of town here, is how you make this place special. Most recently, literally in the last couple of weeks, we also learned that MCB Realty and Dave Bramble, the big donor developer that is a friend of my opponents, bought the PNC building. And the details of this are complicated, but you have to understand, and I will unpack it as best I can, what they did. Because while this backroom deal that the mayor says he had to keep in secret from day one was being negotiated and cemented, Dave Bramble already bought a building that was $80 million in debt and said, I'll take on that debt. I'll assume responsibility for that. And then they put it up on foreclosure. And when he put it up on foreclosure, you know who bought it? He bought it. Now remember, if my dad, who I promise you does not have this money, had tried to buy that building, MCB Realty would have said, Mr. Vignarajah, we're so glad you're buying this, but just so you know, there's an unpaid bill of $80 million. So if you want this building, you're welcome to bid on it. We have a foreclosure auction, but there's an $80 million tab that you're gonna owe to me. The one person who could forgive that tab was MCB Realty, was Dave Bramble. And so you know how many bidders there were in this auction? One. He bought the debt, nothing wrong with that. He held the property until it went to foreclosure, nothing unlawful about that. And then he came to the auction and he bought the property, knowing in the back of his mind that an $80 million building for $25 million, forgiving the debt, is a pretty good deal. But it's a really good deal if you also know that the city is about to give you a $400 million public subsidy to rebuild everything around it. It's also a good deal if you've gotten the campaigns to whom you've donated money to lift the height restriction so you can build as tall as you possibly want. Look, I'm not against development. We of course want to create affordable housing all through the city. I'm not sure this counts, but if you do want to build for the ultra rich, build on the properties you already own. Somebody's going to ask me, well, if the referendum passes, how are you going to block the building of this if this referendum passes? And let's be clear, we know what's happening. We're not stupid. We didn't wake up yesterday. The reason they're doing it by referendum is a thinly veiled ploy premised on the hope that people aren't paying attention. Because I promise you, if the public dialogue around this had not been, to use Aniban's words, a sham, the public would not have told you they wanted luxury condos to replace their public space. But if that referendum does pass, I'm still gonna block it, because we need to have a conversation led by the community, not done in private and led by developers, about what we're gonna do with this most precious space. And the way we're gonna block it is we're gonna use our power of permitting, because they can't build and reconstruct these streets without city permits. At the end of the day, no one controls the right of ways of our city except for the mayor, except for City Hall. And I also want to end today, before I let Aniban and Rebecca share their views on why this is such a terrible idea, calling upon the current mayor and the former mayor to join in this pledge. It's a simple pledge. It's a narrow pledge. You don't have to throw out all of the features of this proposal. But can we all at least agree that this most precious space is not open for construction of luxury apartments. That's the pledge. That's the request. And if you cannot say simply that, if the current mayor cannot make that simple pledge, if the former mayor who knew William Donald Chafin cannot, perhaps invoking his name, cannot make that same pledge, then you know everything you need to know about who they answer to. Because it is not the public at that point. It is the wealthiest of the wealthy and the biggest of the developers.